Hello. Today I would like to tell you about an alternative way how to execute data manipulation language statements against Microsoft Access database. Data manipulation language statements are select, insert, update, and delete statements. If you use Microsoft Access, then you notice right away that the user interface where you can write SQL statements and execute the SQL statements. It's quite limited. For instance, different parts of a SQL statement are not colored differently. There are no line numbers. You cannot use comments here. You cannot execute multiple statements one after another. You cannot check the balance of brackets, etc. So one possible way how to overcome these limitations is to use so-called universal database tools. So universal database tools are programs for which one can connect to the databases of different database management systems and manage these databases through the program. So, for instance, execute SQL statements against the database. There are actually quite a lot of different such tools, but in my talk here, I speak about two tools, DBeaver and DbSchema. And I have selected these tools because in case of both these tools, it's also possible to connect to Microsoft Access database. So in case of DBeaver, there is community edition that is open source and free of charge. And you can download here it as a separate file. And you can also have this professional version that has a larger set of different functionalities, including it supports connecting with NoSQL database management system. In case of DbSchema, you also have different editions. There is a free community edition, and then is commercial professional edition. But there is one and the same file to install these. So you have there is one installation file just in order to use all the functionality of this professional edition. You have to buy a license and pay money for that. And in case of both DBeaver and DbSchema, you can connect with Microsoft Access database and execute SQL statements against Microsoft Access database. Let me start with DBeaver. So I have opened the DBeaver program here. And the first thing that I have to do, I have to define a new connection. And in order to define a new connection, I have to click here. And if I click here, then I see here quite a large number of different database management systems that are supported by this DBeaver Community Edition. These are all SQL database management systems. If I want to connect to NoSQL database management systems, then I have to use this commercial version. I can search here Microsoft Access. And now I have to define the connection. And in order to define the connection, I have to now define the path. So I want to connect with the database hotel. And I click here, finish. And now, after I have defined the connection, now I can move down in this hierarchical connection manager. So I can look here, for instance, what are the tables or what are the views or what are the indexes in my Microsoft Access database. If you have a database against which you want to execute SQL statements, then of course you want to know what is the structure of a database. And if there are not so many different tables, then you can use this comfortable functionality that you just click here on tables and select view diagram. And here, the structure of tables is visualized. Of course, if a database has 60 or 600 tables, then the resulting diagram would be too big, and instead of one large diagram, you would have to create multiple smaller diagrams. And this is, by the way, also possible in case of DBeaver. But in case of such a small database that only has a small number of tables, this functionality is good enough. Now here you see definition of tables or specification of tables. Each box here represents one table. This is the table name. These are the columns of the table. And here you can see the primary key columns of the table. So this section here defines or shows what are the primary key columns. So table reservation has composite primary key that consists of 4 columns, or the table room has composite primary key that consists of 2 columns. And guest backup has primary key, simple primary key that consists of only 1 column. These lines here, they depict foreign key constraints, and the program is able to visualize these relationships between tables because foreign key constraints have been defined in the database. So this is yet another advantage of defining different types of constraints in the database, because these constraints give information to different interested parties, including to different programs that may use the database about the structure of a database. Now, if I want to execute SQL statements against the database, then from here I have to select SQL editor and open SQL console. And this is a place where I can start to execute the statements. By the way, through a graphical user interface, you can you can fulfill different tasks in the database. And one useful functionality is that here you can generate SQL statements based on the tables. So for instance, if I want to generate a SQL statement for creating table guest, then by using this tool, I can get this statement right away. Again, in Microsoft Access graphical user interface, you do not have such functionality. This is a functionality that is provided by this DBeaver tool. By the way, if you look this statement here, when you see that the identifiers are in the square brackets, and the square brackets are mandatory in case of access if this identifier contains spaces. If identifier does not contain spaces, then these square brackets are optional. They are not mistake, but they are not mandatory to have. Also, you can generate, let's say, select, insert, update, and delete statements that are like templates, but you can further modify in order to get the statement that you actually want. And then you can execute this statement by using this console. So if I write here like that, select from total, and I want to execute it, when I put my cursor here on this statement, and I click here, execute SQL query. And I see here the query result. I see here also the statement that was executed. I have to have this symbol at the end of the statement to tell to the system that here, this is where the statement stops. Or for instance, if I want to find where city, by the way, you see that this tool also offers code completion. City equals, let's say, Tartu. And now I execute this statement here, and it succeeds. By the way, here, if I have multiple statements one after another, then of course it's important to have these symbols here at the end of a statement to tell to the reader and to tell to the program that this is where the one statement stops and another statement stops. Okay, so I can execute select statements, and I can also execute insert, update, and delete statements by using this console here. Now, regarding the problems and limitations, one thing that you cannot do here is that, unfortunately, you cannot execute data definition language statements. So if you want to execute create, alter, drop statements or select into statement, then this is not possible here. So if I, let's say, want to materialize the result of this query into table hash, and I execute the statement, then I will get an error. Or if I try to execute create table statement for creating a table in the database, I also will get an error. So this is not supported. And this is in case of Microsoft Access. If you connect with some other database management system, like if you connect to PostgreSQL, for instance, then of course you can also execute, let's say, create, alter, and drop statements. So this is a limitation in case of DBeaver and DbSchema, in case of Microsoft Access. Now, another problem. I have here a set of statements. I have here a set of statements. And these statements actually conform to SQL standard. However, if you try to execute these statements directly in Microsoft Access, then it does not work. If I try to execute these statements in Access database through DBeaver, then now I got an error because I tried to execute these create statements. The connection was closed, or the connection became invalid. So I just disconnect and connect, and now execute the statement again. And now you see it works. So I tried to execute this statement against Microsoft Access database for DBeaver, and it works. If I try to execute it directly in Microsoft Access, then it does not work. With this query here, I find a number of different hotels that have at least one reservation. So the DBeaver program actually takes the statement and translates it so that it is understandable to Microsoft Access. Here I'm using this kind of newer syntax for joining tables, where I join tables over a common over a column that has over a column but both tables have a column with the same name. And in my query result, I have columns from a table hotel. I have columns from a table reservation, but column hotel number is in the query result only once. Here I use this SQL standard specified concatenation operator in order to concatenate strings. Again, if I execute it against Access database for DBeaver, it works. If I execute it directly in Microsoft Access, it does not work. Here I tried to limit the query result by using the limit clause. Access does not support it, but as you can see, this query succeeds. In Microsoft Access, I can use dot predicate, but dot predicate and limit clause are not exactly the same. And here I use some set operations. So I tried to find set theoretical difference. So I tried to find all the guest numbers from a table guest that are not in the table guest backup. And it works. And here I tried to find intersection. So I tried to find guest numbers that are both in the table guest and guest backup. And again, execution of this statement succeeds And again, if I execute these statements directly in Microsoft Access, then it does not work. So you have to pay attention to this. But actually, in case of DBeaver, you can write SQL code that you can execute for DBeaver in Microsoft Access database, but you cannot execute this code directly in Microsoft Access database. So this is something to remember. And actually, what I want to say is that same kind of issues are also present in case of DbSchema. So in case of DbSchema, you cannot execute create, alter, drop, and select into statements in Microsoft Access database. And again, in case of DbSchema, you can execute in Microsoft Access database that are not directly supported by Microsoft Access and that do not conform to a SQL dialect of Microsoft Access. Now I want to point out that these universal database management tools, they are not only for using Microsoft Access. As I said, you can connect with many different database management systems by using the tool. And now I define another connection, and I want to connect with PostgreSQL. I have PostgreSQL in one of the servers in university. And I want to point out that if I'm doing it outside university network, then I have to initiate, first of all, a web connection to be able to connect with the server. Host name, I put it here. Standard PostgreSQL port. Database has name hotel. And here I write my username and password in the server. And I click here finish. And now if I open this connection, then I now see here my database hotel in PostgreSQL in university server. By default, in PostgreSQL, all the user-defined database objects are put in the schema public. So all these tables here are in the schema public. Again, because there are no so many tables, I can initiate looking this diagram. I do not need multiple diagrams. And again, I can, let's say, view data here if I just select it through graphical user interface, or for instance, I can generate back the SQL statement for actually creating the table. And now if I want to execute SQL statements against the database, then now I select SQL editor, open SQL console. It is connected with this connection that was active. And now here I can write query against the database. And I can execute the query. And regarding these statements here, these statements are directly supported by PostgreSQL, so there is no need to actually translate these statements to PostgreSQL by the DBeaver tool. And I can also, let's say, execute data definition language statements. So drop table T, not drop double, but drop table T. Yes, I'm sure I want to execute it. And now if I, let's see, can I refresh my connection? And as you can see, the table T disappeared from this list of tables. So in case of PostgreSQL, of course, I can execute also data definition language statements for DBeaver. And also a small example of DbSchema, similar kind of tool. So I can connect to database. Let's say I want to connect to Microsoft Access database. I want to have standard connection. I want to connect to this hotel database. As you can see, this overview of database structure is generated automatically. And if I click here, editors, SQL editor, I can actually execute a query from here. And just like in case of DBeaver, if I, let's say, have here such statements that are not directly supported by Access, I can still execute these against Microsoft Access through this DbSchema tool. And if I want to, let's say, create the table, create table T, the integer, I want to create a table here. I try to execute the statement when I get an error. So just like in case of the DBeaver, I cannot execute data definition language statements against Microsoft Access database. So this is one of shortcomings. And if I open this DbSchema again, and I can also show that I can connect to PostgreSQL. Standard connection. Again, I must have EduVPN connection opened before I can do it outside university network. My server name, default port for PostgreSQL, database username and password, database to which I want to make a connection. I can check that the connection would be successful. Now I can connect. Okay, and I see here my database structure, and here I can now make a query against the database, as well as execute the data definition language statements, and as well as execute data manipulation language statements. So these are possible alternative tools that you can use in order to execute, select, insert, update, and delete statements against Microsoft Access database.